Vegetarianism is the opposite of veganism. They're not similar, they're not anywhere near the same thing. If this statement sounds crazy to you, it's because you've been swindled into seeing vegetarianism as some kind of benevolent thing, some kind of middle ground between flesh eating and veganism, when actually vegetarianism and flesh eating are as distant from veganism as each other. I like to think of vegetarianism as a sleazy salesman. It presents itself to the buyer as an act of altruism and kindness, when the reality is that the buyer, high on feelings of positivity as they make the transaction, will be paying for exactly the same evil and cruel acts they were paying for before. In fact, the smokescreen of vegetarianism as ethical or even semi-ethical is so strong that I bet many of you who are vegan, who are watching this video, disagree with me vehemently already when I say that vegetarianism is actually the opposite of veganism. I'm going to now prove to you just how effective this sleazy sales trick has been with a simple experiment. If I say shredding male chicks alive in a macerator is the opposite of veganism, I'm pretty sure 100% of people watching this video would say, well, obviously. If I say bludgeoning calves to death with pickaxes is the opposite of veganism, once again, I'd bet my house that every single person watching this video would be in complete agreement. If I say hacking lambs' tails off and sending them on ships for live export in the wool industry is the opposite of veganism, once again, any rational person watching would just agree with me. Yet whenever I say vegetarianism is the opposite of veganism, as is the title of this video, this is met with disagreement and controversy, even though vegetarianism funds all those things. So how on earth is it possible that any of those things alone can be the opposite of veganism, yet somehow when we combine them and just give it a word like vegetarianism, it now magically becomes similar to veganism? It makes no sense. So, just to be clear, in the egg industry, male chicks are shredded alive because they can't lay eggs. Vegetarians pay for this. In the dairy industry, cows are sexually violated, branded with hot irons, have their calves stolen from them, and the male ones are murdered while the female ones grow up as slaves for their lactations and are eventually slaughtered. Vegetarians pay for this. In the wool industry, lambs unfit for wool production are bludgeoned to death by being slammed against the wall or floor, while ones fit for wool production have their tails hacked off, have tags put in their ears, are shorn, often very roughly, being beaten and cut during the process, and are eventually murdered, often after being exported to other countries on hellishly long journeys via boat. Vegetarians pay for this. Now, what about quantity then? You'll find that many apologists for vegetarianism argue that a vegetarian massively reduces their impact in comparison to a meat eater and kills way fewer animals. And you know what? Maybe in some cases that's true. But guess what? You can't just make blanket statements like that. In fact, it absolutely is possible for a vegetarian to cause as much or more harm than a flesh eater. For example, a vegetarian who eats shitloads of eggs and eats animal foods every single day causes way more harm than, say, a flesh eater who maybe has an egg or dairy allergy, who eats bacon once or twice a week and has the odd cheeseless pizza every now and then. The amount of male chicks macerated, and indeed female chicks bred into existence to lay eggs for them and suffer various abuses throughout their lives until being murdered, is astronomical. Then you have to factor in that veganism goes way beyond food. You might get a flesh eater who only buys second-hand clothing, for example, while a vegetarian is an absolute fast fashion queen and is buying the skin, wool and fur of murdered animals on a weekly basis. Then you have people who might live in rural parts of their country and mostly hunt and forage for their own food. For example, they might murder a wild hog or rabbit every week or so, and the flesh is used to sustain a family for however long. The average vegetarian living in a developed country is likely going to be causing way more animal murder than they are. In fact, I've found that vegetarians are often the biggest addicts to these products there are. They absolutely fill their shopping trolleys to the brim with cheese, eggs and so on. It just strikes me as incredibly naive to make these statements like saying that vegetarians cause less harm than flesh eaters do. Which ones? So what about when people say that vegetarianism is a stepping stone and thus some kind of middle ground between carnism and veganism, and that it helps many people transition? The problem with this argument is that it arbitrarily assigns flesh as having some kind of magical halfway transitional property and ignores the others. And this is the problem with the concept of vegetarianism. It treats meat as special in comparison to the other animal products. For example, we don't have a word for someone who eats flesh, honey and dairy every single day, but does not eat eggs. The truth is that someone who matches this description is actually as much of a so-called vegetarian as someone who does not eat flesh but does eat eggs. They are the same distance from veganism as each other. Why then do we have this word and concept of vegetarianism when flesh is just one tiny product in a whole world of torture? When we go into a supermarket, we are surrounded by the products of abuse, rape, slavery and murder, yet the people who boycott just one of these products gets a special word for them. Why? And this is why vegetarianism is such a dangerous concept. It upholds steak and chicken wings as the epitome of all evil, while glossing over the very products that fund the same industries those two products are a part of. I've argued with so many vegans who take particular offence to what I'm saying and tell me things like, I was a vegetarian for 31 years before I became vegan. I just didn't know. The funny thing about stories like that are, they just go to prove my point about how dangerous vegetarianism is and why you should hate its very existence. If you were a vegetarian for many years before you were vegan, that means you were funding the most evil and brutal acts of violence on the planet while thinking you were doing the right thing. I mean, fuck, you should be even more angry about vegetarianism than me. You should be attacking vegetarianism more than I am. You were conned. Remember that sleazy salesman analogy I made earlier? You got absolutely scammed and wasted decades of your life in some cases funding animal abuse when you could have been doing the right thing. Don't get angry at me for pointing this out, get angry at vegetarianism. Another problem with vegetarianism is that its very existence paints veganism as extreme or a step too far. When vegans in any way condone vegetarianism, all they're doing is solidifying this carnist idea that eating flesh is the norm, vegetarianism is, a little weird but okay, and then veganism is just this radical, crazy, out there thing that's just taking it too far. In fact, when you first went vegan, I'll bet my bottom dollar you had people say to you, why not just go vegetarian instead? What we need to be doing as vegans is hammering home the position that vegetarianism isn't some kind of alternative to carnism. It is carnism. You're either a vegan or a carnist. That's it. There's no in between. There's no middle ground. You either support animal slavery or you don't. Veganism is a stance against the exploitation and murder of animals. Vegetarianism, however, revolves around the exploitation and murder of animals. Vegetarianism is the opposite of veganism. Thanks very much for watching, everyone. Please like this video and share it far and wide. Hit the subscribe button, and if you like my content, consider supporting me on Patreon. Thanks, everybody.